The Egyptian culture is one culture that has gone all the way back into ancient times, and not only has survived with the parts of the culture still today. Of course, culture is ever changing. So in modern times, there are no slaves or pharaohs, but instead there is working poor class and help. With the elites in jobs like government and taking the roles of presidents, filling the role of the New Age pharaoh. We also look at the uniqueness of the culture's ability to retain the old traditions, but with a new face and new identity. Egypt provides the rest of the world with a window back in time to their old culture, with one they have today.
When we talk about Egyptian culture and traditions, we're typically talking about an array of tribal customs and traditions dating from the pharaohs to modern times. From ancient times, the Egyptians had a true fixation for their culture and traditions. The royalty of ancient Egypt had a cult for their gold and jewelry, and paid a lot of attention to the clothes they wore, which were preferably silk. The life of ancient Egyptians was coordinated by their gods and goddesses in whom they have a very strong faith. Their religious practices were related to the celestial bodies and their movements.
Today's culture in Egypt is that of a cosmopolitan one, living people that have diverse backgrounds of culture. Egyptian culture is special and unique because of the old cultural heritage was kept intact, yet at the same time, they managed to create a new, modern cultural identity. Today, Egyptians are incredibly open and friendly with visitors in their country, and are incredibly aware of their history and civilization.
If an Egyptian invites you into their house and you refuse, you must then promise that someday you will go into their house. If you break this promise, the Egyptian will be humiliated. This is just one of the Egyptian traditions, and here are some of the guidelines that you should know before you come to Egypt. A man should not talk to a woman he does not know. And when speaking to an Egyptian, there should be some distance in between you. It is tradition for the woman to marry as a virgin. The virginity is considered by men proof of good karma and morality. A woman is to wear a scarf on her head to symbolize Muslim piety and their obedience and modesty.
The cultural traditions affect men and women differently. Women are meant to be virgins when they marry, but it's not specified anywhere where a man should be. Kind of like how our culture is kind of now. Because we do, our dominant ideology in America is Christianity.
Sure.
Women are to be fully covered at all times and are not to speak to strangers. There is a social inequality between gender roles in Egyptian culture and traditions that hasn't changed very much between ancient and present Egypt.
So just add to what you said. So for the consequence of difference, it would be that like women and men typically here in America don't have to be virgins or anything, and it's not, there's a stigma around it, but it's not as much, like it doesn't affect them as much. And when Americans go to Egypt, they could inadvertently end up offending Egyptians because they don't know some of the traditions and cultures, such as like having to take your shoes off when you go into a place of worship, otherwise it's offensive, or like that women need to be typically covered basically from head to toe, and that men, when they go to worship, they have to wear a long sleeve shirt, long pants, you're not really supposed to show skin. But if it's summer, then Americans that go may end up offending someone or being looked at in a bad light just because they don't know to be covered 24/7.
Like it's really important to like research before you go to like a religious country like that. With their cultures and traditions.
That's true.
That go
I agree
back.
with that, but I think nowadays Egyptians are more or less open to visitors coming in and viewing their history and everything like that. So they're more forgiving of like Americans or Europeans coming into Egypt and just not really knowing their whole culture, but learning it throughout their visit.
Yeah, but you still don't want to be like not following any of what they go by, because like if someone came to America and did something that was against like someone's specific religion, they would likely be offended by it, even though the person didn't know they were doing something that offended them. So you still at the same time don't want to do something that may offend them. In the social pyramid during the ancient Egyptian times, pharaohs and those associated with divinity were at the top of the structure, while servants and slaves were at the bottom. with everyone else falling somewhere in between.
Pharaohs, the leaders of the ancient Egyptian world, were believed to be gods in human form, and they were regarded as such. They had absolute power over their subjects. There were pyramids built in their name, just so the pharaoh could die. They were buried in the chambers within the structures.
In one article that we found, it goes, on one particular day in the square, he recalls, a man asked me for a cigarette. He was uneducated, wore slippers, and a traditional ankle lathe garment. A simple man. He pauses, reflecting deeply on a brief encounter. We talked up for a little bit, and it occurred to me until then that I never really mingled with a lower... He stopped himself, embarrassed to complete the thought.
The C word, aka class, is making a comeback into Egyptian rhetoric. Preserved since the reign of Nasir, when socialism disguised class distinctions and set a tone for the empowerment of Egypt's working class. The experiment was brief, and the existence of significant class divisions never really ceased to exist. However, the acknowledgement of these class distinctions did grow incredibly taboo, prompting many people in Egypt to shy away from the very realities that may have fueled certain elements of the Arab Spring.
Egypt's first free and fair presidential election. Now one for the history books, it impacts the social dynamic of the country. It may have been more for lasting effects on society and the political transition. Many in Egypt see Mohammed Morsi as an ally to lower income citizens of Egypt.
Beginning in 1974, the government introduced a series of laws intended to restore and promote private ownership of previously socialized sectors of the economy. These new policies, known as Infitah, so opening or open door policies, helped consolidate the class structure. In 1989, Egypt continued to be a country with a skewed distribution of wealth. About 2,000 families had annual incomes in excess of £35,000. While more than 4 million people earned less than £200, Nasir's socialist policies had led to a doubling of the average real wage in Egypt from 1960 to 1970. From 1970 to 2000, there was no real development in the country.
From ancient to present-day Egypt, your name holds incredible value in who you are. If a member in your family has brought shame or has been of a low class even from the times of ancient Egypt, that name will follow the family. Alternately, if the family has descended from the pharaohs, they are of highest importance, even in modern-day society. Traditionally, the pharaohs were buried with their jewelry and riches, which means the future generations of that bloodline will not see any of these historical items and will have no entitlement to them.
Really, from Egypt and American standpoint, Egypt tends to care a lot more about the names that are held than the actual actions of the person. While in America, it's more about like what you do in the society, how you better yourself is how the kids or grandkids are going to really be in the future. While in Egypt, if you screw up, then down the line your kids and grandkids are really going to feel the effects of what happened to you, and they're going to have to work even harder to get rid of that name.
I do kind of disagree with that, like a little bit. Because like, even in America, right, like, say you're a sibling of like 5 other siblings, right?
Sure.
And then when you go to the same high school that they did, and each of them did something terrible, they're just gonna expect that out of you because that's what they think your family's like.
Oh yeah,
You know what I mean?
I agree with that, but in the same sense, it's just, I mean, we don't hold it to that higher standard. We're not going to immediately think that, or we're not immediately going to put that kid in a lower class. We're just going to see how that kid keeps going.
And that's like on a smaller scale of being
Sure.
in just a school environment, but on a bigger scale, being in Egypt, it's more of that, like, even if 7 generations back, your grandfather stole from somebody,
Yeah.
and you now, not a thief, nothing, well educated, went to a good school, good job, whatever, people are still gonna see you and be like, oh, she came from a thief.
Yeah.
That's what you're known for then. Even like generations past on a larger scale in the country, a lot of people will look at you that way.
And it gives them like really like no room
Yeah,
to really.
and it makes it harder for you
Achieve.
to establish something for yourself individually
Yeah.
outside of your family, whether you're have a bad association with your name or a good association, you essentially can't really be independent of your family.
The Egyptian culture is something you can find nowhere else in the world. They still have a strong class system that they've had since in ancient times, with only some of the names changing. In modern times, the elites are still the ones that are in government and in control, with most of the money in their hands. With the lower class still growing and growing into the middle class, the culture is you still keep your name clean and could not only mean how far you get in life, but how far your kids and grandkids get as well.
I was part of this.